I would say that the majority of the drones that were happening over New Jersey at the time when we were tasked to look at this were definitely non-human.
Keep watching to learn more.
For early access to our videos and live stream events, sign up for our free weekly newsletter at newthinkingaloud.org. New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu.
Book 4 in the New Thinking Aloud dialogue series is Charles T. Tart, 70 Years of Exploring Consciousness and Parapsychology, now available on Amazon.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Emmy Vadnais, co-host with Jeffrey Mishlove. Today we'll be discussing remote viewing the drones with my guest Daz Smith, who is an artist, graphic designer, and a full-time professional remote viewer. He is the editor and publisher of 8 Martinis, the State of the Art of Remote Viewing magazine. Daz also works with a team of remote viewers in the Futures Forecasting group, and he has remote viewed several recent and historic UFO and UAP events. Daz is author of the books Surfing the Psychic Internet, CRV Controlled Remote Viewing Dialogues, and Remote Viewing 9/11. Daz has been a guest several times on New Thinking Aloud. If you enjoy this program, please like, subscribe, press the bell icon, and share. Daz is joining us from Bath, England. Now I'll switch over to the internet video. Welcome back to New Thinking Aloud, Daz. It is a true pleasure to be with you again.
Me too, yeah. It's always an honor to chat about these things with you.
In our last conversation, we talked about remote viewing UFOs and UAP, and I'll link to that interview in the upper right corner of the screen. Today, we're going to go more deeply into a phenomenon that's been happening, seems kind of around the world, where people are seeing this drone activity, and these drones don't always behave like our typical understanding of physics. And some suggest that they are a form of UFO and UAP. To get us started, you actually accidentally saw these drones when you were forecasting a month ahead was it November of 2024?
Correct, yes. As part of the Future Forecasting group, we as a group look ahead a month to try to give our subscribers an idea of what the top news is going to be. And in mid-November of 2024, I was looking ahead and I started describing that over the US there was going to be a dogfight situation between conventional craft and something else.
What else did you see?
Yeah, I knew that there was I knew it was an aerial event. The data was showing me it was an aerial event. And I drew these graphics of like these circling kind of objects in the sky. And I felt like there was going to be like a close miss situation there. And it felt like there were 2 different arcs of movement and 2 different styles of vehicle. And in remote viewing, we're taught to not identify things. So I'm using very low level data. So I'm using data like and I'm reading my data here. One of the objects is very fast. It's mechanical. It's sleek. It's gray. It's code. And then it's a man-made vehicle. So I'm not actually saying what kind of vehicle it is because that's too much of a guess. But I knew I was looking at 2 different types of vehicles. One felt very conventional and the other one felt like it was a bit more advanced than the conventional craft.
Mm-hmm. And what was the dog fighting about?
Yeah, I didn't really go hugely in depth in this. I only did 2 or 3 pages of information because I'm only looking at like basic news stories, and I try to get 10 news stories a month. But it felt like it was, bear in mind this was in mid-November. It felt like it was a military event, an aerial situation I wrote, which was happening skywards. 2 opposing man-mades, I said. One feels definitely like a plane, and the other one felt less so. I didn't know what it was, and I didn't really want to put a name to it because, as I said, in remote viewing, we're taught not to do that. I knew it was definitely over the USA, and it was going to be like it had a scenario of evasion, conflict, and lots of near misses. So I felt like the more advanced object was purposely flying close to the plane-like vehicles. Yeah.
Before we go more deeply into your notes about remote viewing the drone, specifically in New Jersey, can you share a little bit about the remote viewing process for those who might be new to it, and also the accuracy rate and how important feedback is? And since we're talking about UAP, we don't always get that feedback, but in our last conversation, you described how there was some feedback involved.
Remote viewing has been around now since 1972, so we're talking 40, going on 50 years now. And it really is just like any other psychic process. But what we do as remote viewers, we're agreeing to do the psychic process within a set stage of rules, which we call protocols. And that there are 4 or 5 of them that we adhere to, and that's essentially to keep the data clean, and for everyone involved to know that the only source of the information could have been through, psychic means only. And the rules we use are: number 1, it's never spontaneous. There's always a pre-planned project. Number 2, the remote viewer is always blind to the project, so they don't know what the target is up front. Number 3, the data the remote viewer brings back is recorded in some medium, paper, audio, or video, so that it can then be verified and checked. And the 4th one, really, and most important one, is there should always be some form of feedback to then look at the remote viewing data and assess it for accuracy to see if any psychic information took place whatsoever.
You have a pretty high accuracy rate.
Yeah, I mean, it's not fully databased anymore. I did database it for 2 years, but to be honest, databasing gets a bit boring, so I try not to keep up on that.
Mm-hmm.
But, I've been doing this operationally now for nearly 20 years. And, I'm doing it for a business. So people are making decisions and investment decisions based on the kind of information I provide. So, but on average, I'm 80+% correct 80% of the time. Other than, and this is a caveat here, on looking at future-based targets, my data-based accuracy on looking at things, predicting things that are going to happen in the future, drops slightly down to 60 to 65% accurate on those ones.
Right. Because the future is maybe in certain situations, or all, that's debatable, is malleable.
Yes. It seems to be across the board. Anyone that's looking at future-based stuff, the accuracy is way less than it is with their normal psychic practices or remote viewing practices. Yeah.
Yeah. So what was that like for you when you heard about these drones and you recalled your future forecasting the month ahead?
Yeah, I mean, it's always interesting when that happens. And luckily, we give our information to our subscribers, so they saw it up front as well. But luckily, in the case of these months when I was looking at this, I actually put the information up before December started, because I did the remote viewing in November. I put it up on TikTok as live videos as well. So I had it marked that, I made the prediction and the data was out there before all the major drone activity happened.
Mm-hmm.
It's always interesting when you're a remote viewer and you're doing your work and then you see the events happen. It's nice in this case because no one got hurt in this case. It's not so nice in cases when you're predicting things like wars and earthquakes and stuff like that. That's a bit more somber. But in the case of this, it was like, oh yeah, wow, I predicted some kind of aerial dogfight with conventional and unconventional craft over the US, and look what's happening. There's these drones that are evading helicopters and military jets.
Yeah. Well, let's set the stage a little bit about these drones. Of course, there are drones that are human-made, that people use recreationally. They're used for videography, probably surveillance, all sorts of different reasons. However, can you describe a little bit about the drones we're going to be discussing today and what's unique or mysterious about them?
Yeah, the drones, as they've been reported in the press, and even to this day, because, they've come back a year later and they're over Denmark at the moment. They're being video recorded, for one. There are hundreds of videos, especially of the New Jersey drones, but now of the ones that are in Europe as well. And they seem to be different sizes. So some of them start off as like sphere-shaped lights, but some are recorded as being multiple lights in multiple colors and the size of small SUVs, which is incredibly huge for a drone-like vehicle. And they seem to be flying at will through any airspace that they want to, including militaries and airports. They shut down airports in the New Jersey area last year, and they're shutting down airports in Europe right now. And they seem to be able to fly at will and also hover in place and stay, in the vicinity for several hours on end, which is not what you can do with a typical commercial drone. I have one, for example, a small one, a DJI Mavic one, and that's only got a 20-minute flight time before you have to pull it down and then put a new battery into it. So, yeah, these are very mysterious, occurrences right now, and no one to date has really give an explanation of what they are.
Also, some of them have been reported to behave anomalously, where they seem to sort of appear out of thin air and disappear before people's eyes.
Yeah, they disappear before, as you're watching them, and that's recorded on video as well. There are even reports that some of them are what we call transmedium as well, so they're actually going in and out of the water.
Wow.
And into the sky as well, which, again, commercial, you wouldn't fly your commercial drone into the water because you'd never see it again.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting on what's going on. And no one really knows what the full picture is, which is why, I was tasked to look at it by the Hellfire group.
Just to clarify, when you said that they shut down airports, are the drones doing that, or are the operators of the airports because they're not able to function with them around?
Yeah, it's definitely the airport operators themselves, because the drones are, they're actually flying around flight paths and in restricted airspaces.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I fly a commercial drone myself, because I'm a bit of a photographer, and when you hook up your drone to the software here in the UK, the map GPS software that you see on the screen actually tells you where the no-fly zones are. And in some cases, there's a GPS cordon up, so you can't actually fly into those areas, which again is another reason why this definitely isn't commercial type drones, because the software just wouldn't allow you to go into those areas and fly them.
Additionally, there's been reports where some world leaders will say, we don't know what they are, we do know what they are.
Yeah.
Some will say that it's not military. And some will suggest, well, maybe it's just from some other country that has some advanced form of technology that we're not necessarily aware of. However, the UAP experience that people have been having has been seeming to heat up, and there's more information coming out. Yeah. You were tasked to remote view an area in New Jersey. If you can set up the scene of what you were tasked to do and let us in on what you found.
As I said, the first remote viewing I did was for my work life, which is Future Forecasting Group. But separately, 4 months later, actually 3 months later, early in February of 2025, as part of a different kind of remote viewing practice group where we look at mysteries type targets, I was set a blind target, myself and 6 other remote viewers, by a tasker called Dimmy. And we didn't know it at the time. All I had was a random number to focus upon. But the hidden tasking was for us to look at a specific drone citing an occurrence that had a picture attached to it. So there was a picture and a video taken of the drone event, and that was over New Jersey, Morris County, New Jersey, just by the Pitcairn Arsenal. And we were asked to look at that one drone event and try to describe the object in the video, its origin, the purpose of his mission, and all kinds of stuff like that.
Right. So the task that you were given is predetermined by somebody else, in this case, Dimmy,
Yes.
and you were only given a number. And then
Yes.
you, who is a practice professional for decades really now, also having been raised by a mother who was a spiritualist and clairvoyant medium, if I recall correctly, that you
Correct, yeah.
were raised to develop these natural abilities actually that we all have, which
Yeah.
is a big part of why we have these conversations, is to inspire people with their abilities as well. That you're using not just inner sight with clairvoyance or remote viewing, but really another term is like interoception, using all of your senses to gather
Yes.
data and information, just focusing on this number with somebody else who has an intent for you.
That's correct. That's correct. Yeah, and remote viewing is slightly different than most what I call classical psychic techniques. In that most people, when you're training classically, you have a skill or ability in one. So you'll find that someone is either clairvoyant or they're clairaudient or they're a medium or a channeler. They're not usually broad. Whereas remote viewing is unique in that, we see the target, smell the target, taste the target, touch the target, and then we can move around the target by using movement commands, move above, inside. And then we can even do things like, if we're kind of getting the feeling the target's involving an event, we can even create timelines on our sheet of paper and say, okay, this is the time now, let's slide back 3 days or slide forward a year, and so on, and then relook at the target from different time zones as well as dimension zones. Yeah.
And so the theory of receiving a number and having a tasker, project manager give you this and have their intention is so that you are able to limit analytic overlay.
Yes.
And be able to have more clear data.
So yeah, they set the target, and as I said, in the case of the drones one, the target number was 7840-3771. So that's all I had, and essentially to go work the target. And myself and the other 5 or 6 remote viewers spent the next 2 months looking at it. Then, and how that happens is, I did a remote viewing session, and it's usually for me 10 to 20 pages of A4 data, sketches in words. You send that back to the project tasker. If you haven't got everything they want to know within those 10 pages, they will then strategically look at your data, and without feeding you any new information, they'll say something like, on page 6 you drew this, or on page 8 you mentioned this word, go back and get more. They will always retask you to get more information, but not introducing anything new, making you look at your own data and getting more of your own data. And that may happen 4 or 5 times, that process of me doing my RV, sending it to them saying, okay, I need more, go back and get more. And that's pretty much the process.
So what did you find? What are these drones, or in this particular case, what did you discover? I know you received a lot of fabulous information.
Yeah. And maybe we can share the screen and show some of this in a while. But in summary on this, and bearing in mind, I was only really looking. The target was the one event, with the one photograph and the one video. But in that case, I felt in my data anyway, and the other viewers' data corroborated this for the most. My data indicated that there was a team of professional military stroke intel people that were in the area, and they had the ability to communicate, or what was the right word, draw or entice this drone into place.
Like summon?
Summon would be a great word. Yes, that's exactly what they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
And the drone that they summoned into place was an exotic, non-human type craft, really. And I think my data describes it best. I wrote it down that it felt like it was a manifested organic technology in the form of an object.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that it also was a transforming organic technology that was pliable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's not how we see technology as a, like my microphone here or this cup or my water bottle here and stuff. It's not a solid technology. It's a technology that can, it's organic and it can change. And what my data showed me was that dependent on the dominant intent of the people in the area that were watching the object, it kind of scanned the area. So the object would manifest through almost like a portal or a break in time and space, like a portal or dimension would open and it would slip through. And that would be like a big energy event that would last, a microsecond. So then the object's there, and a bit like submarines where they can ping underneath the water, and then the waves move out, and if it hits an object, it sends a signal back. They can do that, but it's I don't know how they do it. So they kind of ping the area with these waves, and this tells them what consciousnesses are in the area. So what humans are in the area that are observing them, and they then, dependent on what the most dominant consciousness in the area was, they then change. These objects change their form and shape to what that dominant consciousness expects to be seeing in the skies. So for some people, if they're expecting to be seeing some kind of high technological aircraft, that's what their form would change into. Or what I couldn't work out, and I have to be honest, I couldn't work out if they actually changed their form to that, or if they influenced that person in some way to make them think that that's what they were seeing. I didn't really investigate that. It would have been nice for me to go back and try that a bit more. So I have to be clear on that. I don't know if their form actually changed, or if they made the person, because there's a two-way kind of psychic connection going on. I don't know if they made that person think that that's what they were seeing. But yeah, so they kind of made it look like they were changing shape, or they were physically changing shape in a form of camouflage, really.
Wow. Do you know if there are reports of people who have been able to see it where somebody else couldn't see it? Or that two people are looking at the same object and see something slightly different?
Absolutely, there are multiple reports of that. There's a wealth of those now from last year, and even what's occurring now again over Europe as well at the same time. So yeah, we have multiple incidents of people saying that these objects are shape shifting again, which is good for me because this data came after I did the remote viewing on this, and people. I guess people might have thought at the time, "Oh, this is crazy. We don't have shape-shifting craft," but that's what's being recorded in witness testimony now, and in video and pictures.
I know you have pages and pages of notes from your session.
Yep.
Why don't you share some more highlights that you think our viewers would love to see and listeners would love to hear?
Okay, I'm just going to share the screen here with the share button. I'll start off with this one. I started off telling you that these craft kind of manifested, and here was me I was watching the process of one appear, and I was trying here to just sketch it. So I'm on page 3 of my remote viewing data here, and it's quite a formal kind of structure, this, and bear with me because my handwriting's not very good as well, so I'll have to read it to you. But I'm trying to detail what I'm seeing in my head here, and I saw a process of this craft manifesting out of like this hole. So here's this hole starting to appear. I'm thinking this is up in the sky here. And I wrote here's nothing, and then there's a dense compression inwards. Then we move to part 2 here, and that's an explosive energy release, and it has like an opening feel. So it's starting to open with this energy release. We move to stage 3 here. It feels like an object then manifests out of this energy event. So there's the energy event with the object half poking out. And then the 4th stage here, I've got the object that's left alone. I wrote here, only the object remains, and the energy is gone, other than dissipating energy waves that can still be tracked in some way and picked up. So the object itself just manifested out of nowhere, really, out of time and space. I then asked what the purpose of this was and got the information that this was an information gathering device and it could be used for communication. And then at this point, even though I'm blind to the target, we had this AOL, which is an analytical overlay. So I had a guess come through once I saw that this was for data communication of, oh, this must be a drone, which I wrote there as an AOL. So I'm already nailing and naming the target very off, but I'm trained. So I'm very adept at putting that to one side and still going back in trying to get the data on this. I then described it as a curved shell-like object, smooth, white, grey, and aerodynamic. And then right off the bat, the moment I had aerodynamic, I also had another AOL here. I knew instantly that this was a shape-shifting device. And I wrote a note to myself here that this feels dynamic, like it changes form or body shape. And it's organic technology, which is energy itself. So it's very strange. It's not physical, the whole shape of its energy. And I would say it's probably plasma. It's self-propelled, I wrote here, organic and alive. So the actual, what we would call as a craft or technology is actually an alive, sentient, thought thinking thing. It's data gathering. It's a remote object. So I didn't feel like there was life inside it. I felt it was being remotely controlled by life that was distant from it. I wrote here, it reacts to intent, which is situational. I wrote, this feels like it's a transformer. It can change shape. It's a technology that reacts to local consciousness and interaction. It scans locally, then adapts to what it picks up as intent, and this is camouflage. I then asked the question, what's it doing? And I got gathering data and intentions. And then I had the feeling that it was lured here. So I asked who, I was trying to find out if it's lured here, who lured it. And there's a group, which is a small group of people up high, and they're watching, a group of 6 or so men, black clothes, militaristic, covert, and operational. And this felt like a test, like the object or event was baited here to be observed. And then I tried to describe this. So there's the men up here up high, and here's the object in the sky here. And it was actually interacting with the men up high and other life down here. And the other life were just general people in the area that just happened upon it and were watching it as a normal event.
Mm-hmm.
I go into detail here about the group, the dark group that we're doing. As I said, I felt like they were some kind of militaristic intelligence type people. I actually named them in the document as well. We did find out, or I found out about 4 or 5 months later, that group involving a UAP whistleblower was actually in New Jersey doing what I said they were doing by luring these down at that time. Yeah. They call it CE5 type data that they were doing. So here's a summary of some of my data here. This is an event or events. It involves non-human esoteric technology and human interactions. It's a nighttime event or series of events. There are at least 2 groups of people involved. Group 1 is military intel types, and they're organized. And group 2 is the general public, and they're spread below the event. There's an energy event in relation to a planned action, which feels like it's bait. And then there's a manifested organic technology, which is an object. And it's a transforming form, which is organic and pliable. And it's remote operated technology for data recon and communications. I then tried to find out here roughly how far the reach of this, because I said that it could scan an area and then tell the people or show the people a different look depending on the dominant people that were looking at it. I looked at how far this would be, and this is a scale thing we can do in remote viewing. And I did a scale here between 0 and 100 miles. And I felt like its ability was able to scan just around about 25 miles around itself. And then it also shape shifts towards who is the dominant consciousness within that 25-mile area. And as I wrote here, this is like a form of camouflage for itself. And because of all this data, I then said to myself, I went a bit off par with this. I said, okay, well, bear in mind, I wrote that this is remotely controlled. I then gave myself a movement command in the remote viewing of the point of origin, follow. So I was trying to follow it back to where it came from. And I did this very strange ideogram here that showed me that I was moving through folded layers here, which were dimensions. So I felt that it actually moved through dimensions, not through space. And then I ended up looking at, and I had a visual of this in my head, a huge metropolis, which was a gigantic, and it was full of life. It was very busy. It was tall, high, and it felt like it was a living world that was vertical. So I had this image, and then I tried to draw it, but my drawing's not very good, I'm afraid. So this would be a vast city in that just almost like floating in dimensions or space, hundreds of miles high, and it felt a bit like a hive. Felt like I could see like all these objects and beings and stuff at the different levels. And it was very organic shape. Nothing like what we would design here on Earth where we try to do things in linear lines and straight and stuff. This was very higgledy-piggledy and organic. And I just wrote here, the scale of this is just too big to describe. It's a vast, tall, vertical, layered city. And that's essentially where I ended that RV session then. Because it was, when it gets a little bit weird like that and you're kind of seeing stuff in other dimensions, you kind of think to yourself, what am I doing? Where am I going? This is just a bit too crazy. I might be wandering into imagination.
Didn't you at one point have an analytic overlay of the drones?
Yes, I did. Yes.
When did that happen for you?
That was very early on. That was probably on my second or third page at the RV session. The moment I kind of saw that it was something manifesting through this kind of energy event, because I know that, everyone knows we don't have that kind of tech, where there's nothing in the sky, then a weird portal opens and an object pops through. The moment that happened, it was like, whoa, yeah, this feels like a drone. And that's when I wrote the word drone down on the sheet of paper.
Based on what you remote viewed, since this was your own internal experience, what is your assessment of who they are? Why are they here? Where do they come from?
Yeah, I would need to do more RV on it, but just from the single RV session, and also bear in mind the other 5 or 6 remote viewers also had something to add to this as well. So that as a project had a whole new, a lot of a weight to this to support. I would say that the majority of the drones that were happening over New Jersey at the time when we were tasked to look at this were definitely non-human in nature. It looks like there was some normal activity as well, and that might have been helicopters and normal drones and planes that were sent to investigate.
Drones observing drones.
Yeah, it gets crazy, doesn't it? And it does feel like the one, at least the one that we looked at, the event we looked at, was a baited event. And as I said, on X several months later, I did see a report from, and I can mention the guy's name. There's a whistleblower called Jake Barber, who was a government guy, and he claims to have seen and been exposed to many UAP things when he was part of the proper military circles. He's now doing this operation called Skywatchers, where he has these what they call psionic assets. So essentially, people like myself, psychics, that are able to essentially bait and call these non-human intelligences down, and then they're trying to capture them on film and to communicate. And it just so happens that he was in the area doing that kind of thing when we had that event, and I think he's probably the person. In fact, I name him in the RV session as being one of those people in that up high with the rest of those intel military type guys that were calling these objects into existence.
Yeah. How much is consciousness involved in these drones, do you think or feel?
More than I think the whistleblowers would like people to think. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think, especially from my RV data as well, and not just from this, because I've been tasked to look at other UAP events as well, and they've been heavily consciousness based as well. Because the craft, they're not craft. We call them craft, but it's hard. I don't think craft is the right word.
Yeah. The forms or the structures or.
Yeah, the organic flying things are just as live in some degree as we are. The weird thing is, I don't think it's coincidental that over the last 5 years, our incredible steps and advancements we've made with AI, I don't think that's coincidental, because that exact same sentient, almost alive, or probably alive AI kind of feeling is the feeling I get from the drones. It's very similar to when I'm having a conversation with ChatGTP, and how knowledgeable it is, where you can't really tell if it's alive or not. That's what the UAP craft seem to feel like, and when you kind of connect to them, it is like a symbiotic relationship. They feed off you, you feed off them. It's a very strange thing. So, absolutely, consciousness is at the heart of all of this.
Yeah, and how much have you sensed that the human species consciousness is involved, juxtaposed to this NHI or UAP? I know you mentioned you feel it's symbiotic, but what kind of relationship do we have with it or them if they are really separate from us?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's one I ponder a lot, because some of the reports we have had of UAP encounters have been quite negative. They have we have to be honest here, as well as some humans having positive encounters and having positive mental and physical effects from this, where they've been healed, they see all kinds of spiritual stuff. There are also just as many reports of people having physical damage and mental damage from these kind of things as well. So I don't really know. I have to be honest, I've been looking at the UAP subject almost as long as I've been into the psychic one. I started looking at UAPs in 1989, and it's been a close subject of mine ever since. What worries me is that if they were spiritual beings, they would be more open, and they wouldn't let the governments lie to us like they're doing. And that's the biggest thing that worries me, is that, why haven't they, it would be, we all know it would be hugely beneficial for mankind to know that we aren't alone in the universe, and to be able to interact consciously with their technology and with them as beings, as live beings.
Mm-hmm.
But they haven't allowed that, and that's what worries me. I think we're slowly getting there. Maybe it's a drip feed kind of situation where it's too much, and we need to learn it out slowly over decades to acclimatize to it. That might be the reason. But it does worry me that there does seem to be some subterfuge there.
Some have suggested we're not quite ready for it. Some have suggested that there's different types of NHI, UAP,
Yes.
and they may have different agendas, if you will.
That's true.
I think even in preparing for this conversation today, I believe you mentioned that this drone activity might be a form of, which is a buzz term these days, disclosure, or a way for us to become more aware of this, and that for some people it might just literally blow their minds. And so it takes a little bit to warm up to these other ways of physics, if you will, and consciousness.
It's very possible we are, over the past, I would say, 4 or 5 decades now, since Roswell. Well, that's 7 decades, isn't it? In 47, I would say we are, but mainly since the 70s, we are going through a climatized type program, especially with the government and media. Because the government controls media to a certain degree and slowly drip feeds information out. So I do believe that is absolutely happening on that level. As to what and how the different groups of non-humans have a say in that, we just don't know at this stage. But some of the spiritual side of it does worry me a little bit. But saying that, there are many people out there that have some absolutely amazing spiritual encounters with some of these. I guess it's like everything we do as humans, we try to think of things as black and white, but there's many scales of grey in between, and we just can't comprehend or know the the full situation right now. All my information on this case is literally just looking at that one event. Something that might have been happening on the next night, a little bit down the road, might, for all we know, have been a different non-human with a different intention and purpose. We just don't know.
Yeah. And of course, the other side of all this is that it may be that, or some may think that this is human-made and that we're just not maybe privy to some of that advanced technology that's been developed. However, do you have a sense of that one way or another?
I believe, and my intuition tells me this as well, that it's possible that some of the drone activity is us trying to respond with our advanced technology. And that might have been what actually drew the non-humans to look at it in the first place, because they're like, oh, they're curious on what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
From what I've seen with normal data, on the internet and research and stuff, and with my RV data, it's clear to me that this definitely is some kind of non-human kind of interaction with us.
Additionally, there are reports that some of these drones have been over military bases around the world, and also specifically bases where there are nuclear capabilities. I don't know the actual data on that, but do you have any specifics about that?
Just stories that we're getting in the press reading. I mean, and in historical data, we know, from many of the witness testimonies and books and videos out there, that UAPs have had a great interest in what we're doing with our nuclear capabilities, going way back to at least the 60s. And, there are even interactions that have been recorded. Again, it's witness testimonies. It's not completely solid. And whistleblowers talking about the UAPs have actually interacted with missile silos and with weapons, turning them on and off at will as they want. So we do have that on record. And there are some rumors that, some of the activity over some of the military bases it might be to do with what's happening with military actions in the world, possibly moving nuclear missiles and weapons around, and they're interested in see what's going on with that. We can't, it's very hard to absolutely confirm or deny anything because, obviously keep the positions of where military tactical weapons are secret operations. Really, it's not common knowledge.
We probably don't, us civilians probably don't, well, I'm pretty sure we don't know where all of them are. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, based on your experiences of remote viewing, UFO, UAP, and now this drone situation, what are the implications for people? Like, what is it that you hope people will take away from our conversation?
Yeah, well, great question. Well, definitely that we're not alone. Absolutely. But what form that takes is I can't answer. All I can say is in this case alone, and in some of the other cases I looked at, the non-humans don't appear to be from another planet kind of thing. It definitely feels more dimensional, time, space, and dimension related, rather than it does a different galaxy or planets type situation. And they've been here probably longer than we have. And from some of my other RV looking at some of the past cases as well, they kind of see us or indicate that we're like a garden that they're tending. Yeah, they see Earth as a garden, and they're the gardeners. And I don't know if that means physically or mentally and spiritually, or maybe all of it. I don't know. But there are very good whistleblowers out there now that have what they call first-hand experience of the craft, the aliens or the entities in the craft, and the reverse engineering programs. And quite a lot of them now are saying that the crashed craft and what's happening has been purposely seeded to us for our own personal development. So it seems that, if that's true, it seems like they've been interested in taking us technologically wise and maybe even spiritually wise and consciousness wise in very specific directions for quite a few decades.
For those who are interested in this topic, which I imagine are those who are still listening to this conversation, what would you suggest if they are interested in developing their remote viewing or psychic abilities, and also if they want to interact with these UAP or non-human intelligences?
Yeah, well, the remote viewing side, I would definitely recommend people read before jumping with 2 feet straight into it. Because although all of us are intuitive and psychic to one degree or another, lesser and greater, we can all access this kind of stuff without training. To get the really good data and, to be as skilled as someone like myself, it has taken me 3 decades to get there. Well, that is built on what I did. I did have a solid sounding of natural ability.
Yeah.
So that helped me immensely.
And you were raised in an environment that encouraged it as well.
Yes, which helped me in a way that many people don't get to have, because it's quashed where they're brought up for religious and other social reasons, really.
Mm.
So I would say read first, read a bit about the history, about how it works, and then make a conscious decision if you want to, like if you were trying to learn a martial art or another skill like playing an instrument, you have to make a conscious decision that you need to put 2 or more years of your life and dedication towards honing this as an art and a skill. And if you don't want to do that, there are ways to quickly learn a few basics to then, make this a kind of skill where you can find car park spaces or your car keys or simple things like that. So you have to make that kind of decision. But yeah, definitely read first and investigate first.
And definitely do that before trying to interact with these.
Yeah. I wouldn't try to do any of the more advanced stuff, like trying to interact with non-humans. And it's just like any psychic endeavor, really. And even the basic stuff like meditation. Some people aren't in the right mental space to open themselves up to the possibilities of, oh my God, I can go anywhere in time and space and look at all these life forms that are everywhere around me that I can't see.
Yeah.
So you have to be in the right headspace, the right frame of mind, the right state of being with your family and life situation to be able to absorb that. And I have seen, and there are cases of some people that haven't been in the right spaces, so that it has caused them, we have to be honest, psychological issues for a while and stuff. So yeah, you have to be very careful on how you approach this kind of stuff. We've all seen stories about how being esoteric can be dangerous, Ouija boards, all that kind of stuff. And to a degree, that's true. You have to be careful that you're mentally prepared for what you're attempting to do.
Yeah, and also be very aware of the intention of why you want to interact.
Absolutely, yes. Intention for humans and consciousness of humans is key to everything. And one of the things I've noticed when I'm remote viewing the non-humans as well is that that's one of the things that they're very interested in us as humans is our consciousness and our abilities that we don't really know, but we have these abilities that pretty much limit us. We can do anything. But the majority of us on the planet, we have that stifled and we don't believe it.
Yeah.
And once you do believe it and really trust in your abilities that you can do anything, you can accomplish anything, I think that's what that's what they're interested in, that spark. I don't think or some of the ones I've looked at in remote viewing do not have that ability or that natural spark, which is why they keep coming back to us and examining us and maybe even growing us to help adapt that spark.
Daz, right before you said that, I was just thinking that, and I was thinking of Chris Bledsoe, who, of course, for those who are familiar with him, if not, he wrote a book, UFO of God, but he also, where he talks about his experiences with beginning to interact with non-human intelligences and see orbs. And he actually works with groups and produces or calls or summons these orbs. And I know for him, it's very spiritual. And I do think if I recall correctly, that he talks about exactly what you just said, is that you need to believe that you can do this, and most people don't believe that they can.
Yeah. Belief and intent and consciousness can do anything. And it's all the same thing as creativity as well. So where I get my intuitive data is the exact same place where I get my spark of creativity. You know, I have to be creative. I have to get out there, take photographs, create art, music, dance. All that comes from this spark of what makes us human. And yeah, it's the total belief in yourself that you can do it, which allows you to do it.
Yeah, and also maybe perhaps while we're interested in these NHIs, maybe we can take more interest in ourselves and explore our own possibilities as well.
Absolutely, 100%. And you know, I mentor people and I teach them how to, or I help teach them how to remote view. But my biggest thing that I say to them is, when I'm teaching you remote view, I'm not teaching you anything mystical, no magical thing. I'm teaching you how to notice your own internal impressions. When you learn the remote view, all you're really doing is learning to listen to yourself and all this subtle signals, feelings, thoughts, inspiration, creativity that comes through you. And you listen to it over a period of years enough that you trust it and you can interpret it better.
Yeah. And that trust is really key as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The moment when I was learning remote viewing, the moment I slipped from this, and it was like a light switch going on for me, the moment I said, I don't care if I'm right or wrong anymore, I totally trust my data because that's what I'm getting. That's when it all massively improved for me. And yeah, I've never looked back since. No matter how weird the data, I write it down and trust it's correct.
Daz, what are the next steps with remote viewing, UFO, UAP, and the drones, do you think? Or where does your interest lie in what's next with this?
Wow, that's a good question. I think, and I haven't seen it done yet, it might have been done in secret circles somewhere. It would be nice to have a group of talented remote viewers or psychics funded to do long-term projects to try to understand what's going on with the non-human intelligence situation. On, you know, are there different levels? Are there different non-humans? You know, if there are, can we kind of categorize them? Can we find out what their intents are, where they're from? So a big coordinated I would like to say a big funded coordinated project to try to answer many questions and build almost like a database or a knowledge base of what could possibly be going on. But that would need, you know, that would be like a 1 or 2 year long-term effort with X amount of funding to be able to do that. And it's just not happening out there right now. There are people like myself doing the occasional project that touches on this, but nothing cohesive that's putting it all together in one form that a lot of people then could have access to.
Although maybe certain governments, or as you say, secret groups are exploring this, and we just simply don't know.
I'd be very surprised if they weren't, because as you know, or as we're discussing, remote viewing as a mechanism is very cost effective. Once you have someone trained or has an ability to do this, you just need to sit them down with a tablet or with a stack of paper for an hour or two and you get your data. There's no cost to that.
Truly amazing, Daz. Is there anything else you want to share today about remote viewing the drones?
Don't believe what you may be told in the press and stuff. Some of this is non-human. It looks like we don't really know what's going on. There is a very interesting technology there, which is not like any technology that we know as humans, because it is alive and organic. And yeah, just that, you know, we're all connected in this. Keep your mind open. Lots of things are changing in the world. Maybe that's why they're interacting right now. And if you're very interested, try this for yourself. You know, there's very easy ways to try remote viewing or to be intuitive yourself and see where you can take this. That's the best way to understand if this is real or not, is to try it yourself and see where you go.
Yeah, definitely. Daz, your track record is very inspiring, along with the folks you work with at the Futures Forecasting Group and the other great remote viewers. We also have a very talented one who is a guest host. here, Deborah Lynn Katz as well. I know you worked on some projects with Deborah, who's currently the president of the International Remote Viewing Association. And I really appreciate you inspiring all of us and sharing information that we may not necessarily come across in the mainstream news. Thank you so much for being with me once again. And I look forward to more opportunities to have even more conversations as more data and information comes your way in the future. Thank you, Daz.
Yeah, me too. It's always a pleasure chatting with you.
Wonderful. And for those of you watching or listening, thank you for being with us, because you are the reason that we are here.
For early access to our videos and live stream events, sign up for our free weekly newsletter at newthinkingaloud.org. New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu. You can now download all 8 copies of the New Thinking Aloud magazine for free, or order beautiful printed copies. Go to newthinkingaloud.org.